the red?
Yeah.
Well, please, Professor Fanon.
Okay. Frantz Fanon was born on the Caribbean island of Martinique in 1925 and grew up a gentleman of the French Empire. He realized when he came from the island of Martinique to the mainland of France in Europe, through involvement in the French army elsewhere, that his class privilege among his own black people did not mean anything in the country of the colonizing masters. He was nothing but a black man. In a famous chapter in his book, Black Skin, White Masks, rejected as a dissertation by a French university, he mentions his shock when a white French child cries out to her mother, "Mama, see the Negro." But Fanon moves from just this shock into an attempt to understand colonization all over the world. In this very book, in the last chapter, he walks us through a reading of the European philosopher Hegel's famous chapter on master and slave and turns it to his own use. As we watch the film today concerning violence, we remember this in the freedom fighters' invocation of the named states of Mozambique and Angola, borders established by the imperialists. Fanon's lesson was that you use what the masters have developed and turn it around in the interests of those who have been enslaved or colonized. In this, he is with great leaders like W.E.B. Du Bois and Nelson Mandela. Fanon did not stop at thinking colonization, but wanted to do something about it. He gave his time and skill to the healing of those who suffered from violence. The French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, himself a strong anti-colonialist among the colonizers, read the book Fanon wrote in the last 10 weeks of his life, knowing that he was marked for death by acute leukemia, even as he was being hounded by the colonizing government of France. Sartre read it as an endorsement of violence itself, not reading between the lines, where Fanon insists that the tragedy is that the very poor is reduced to violence because there is no other response possible to an absolute absence of response and an absolute exercise of legitimized violence from the colonizers. Those lives count as nothing against the death of the colonizers. Unacknowledged Hiroshimas over against sentimentalized 9/11s. It is within the context of the aftermath of colonialism that Fanon could not know that the tragedy of what we watch in this film must be carefully considered. This is a teaching text. I add a word on gender. This film also reminds us that although liberation struggles force women into an apparent equality, sharing and starting with the 19th century or even earlier, when the dust settles, the so-called post-colonial nation goes back to the invisible long-term structures of gendering. The most moving shot of this film is the Black Venus, reminding us of the Venus of Milo with her arm gone, and also Black Madonna suckling a child with bare breasts. This icon must remind us all that the endorsement of rape continues not only in war, but also, irrespective of developing and developed nations, in women fighting in legitimized armies. Colonizer and colonized are united in the violence of gendering, which often celebrates motherhood with genuine pathos. Here we have to promote our brother Fanon into a changed mindset. But he, who would have been in his 80s today, is not there for us. Here now is our film, a tribute to and an illustration of Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth. I end it in Fanon's own way, turning around for our own use what a European philosopher wrote for the use of Europe over 200 years ago, turning Kant around for our purposes as he did Hegel, and I quote, "Anything which the people, that is the entire mass of subjects, cannot decide for themselves, and their fellows, cannot be decided for the people by the sovereign either. The people under colonization have had no practice of freedom. You cannot decide without practice. The ones you see on the screen are a small part of the people, the poorest of the poor, mobilized into violence by sovereign leaders, cannon fodder. This practice goes in all armies, all resistance movements, in the name of nation and religion. Here, Fanon would have been useful today. But we must ourselves gender the people. Our brothers Kant and Fanon are not useful here. I thank Göran Olsson for setting us these tasks.
Colonialism is not a thinking machine, nor a body endowed with reasoning faculties. It is violence in its natural state, and it will only yield when confronted with greater violence. National liberation, national renaissance, the restoration of nationhood to the people, whatever may be the headings used or the new formulas introduced, decolonization is always a violent phenomenon. Decolonization is a historical process. It cannot be understood, it cannot become clear to itself, except by the movements which give it historical form and content. Decolonization, which sets out to change the order of the world, is obviously a program of complete disorder. But it cannot come as a result of magical practices, nor of a natural shock, nor of a friendly understanding.
On the night of the 23rd of May, I was taken by MPLA into Cabinda, near the Congo border, and their preparations were being made for this military operation. Cabinda contains one of the world's largest oil deposits, larger than Kuwait. Well, they carried more than 40 up to 50 kilos each, because they had to carry their own ammunition plus the ammunition for the 20 bazookas in the force. They walked very swiftly anyway, using mainly tennis shoes or light rubber shoes. After these several days of march, we finally came close to the Portuguese base and camped in the forest within about 2.5 kilometers of the base. The reconnaissance commander, Max, explained the situation of the base and how the attack was to be carried out.
Eu, em companhia dos outros camaradas responsáveis, vimos a situação e está ótimo para nós.
We moved from the camp about 3 o'clock in the morning, and everything was done with great calm and absolute silence. And as soon as it became light enough just to barely see, the order was given to open fire. They only fired back for a couple of minutes with machine guns. After that, there was no reaction on their part anymore. Very soon, many buildings in the base started burning, and there was a big explosion of an ammunition depot. When the attack was stopped, a small group of MPLA came out of the base with a jeep. If I've ever seen a guerrilla movement that is like the fish in the water, well, that's MPLA in Cabinda. I've seen it with my own eyes.
You do not turn any society, however primitive it may be, upside down with such a program if you have not decided from the very beginning to overcome all the obstacles that you will come across in so doing. The native who decides to put the program into practice and to become its moving force is ready for violence at all times. From birth, it is clear to him that this narrow world, strewn with prohibitions, can only be called in question by absolute violence. Decolonization is the meeting of two forces, opposed to each other by their very nature. Their first encounter was marked by violence, and their existence together, that is to say, the exploitation of the native by the settler, was carried on by the impact of a great array of bayonets and cannons. In decolonization, there is therefore the need of a complete calling into question of the colonial situation. If we wish to describe it precisely, we might find it in the well-known words, "The last shall be first, and the first last." Decolonization is the putting into practice of this sentence. That is why, at a descriptive level, all decolonization is successful. The naked truth of decolonization evokes for us the searing bullets and blood-stained knives which emanate from it. For if the last shall be first, this will only come to pass after a murderous and decisive struggle between the two protagonists. That affirmed intention to place the last at the head of things can only triumph if we use all means to turn the scale, including, of course, that of violence.
It was about 11 o'clock. I heard a rough knock on the door. And I said, "Who is there?" And they shouted, "Police." So I dressed up and I went with the police to their police cells. They told my wife that I would be back in a short period of time.
How long were you in prison?
I was in prison approximately for 5 years.
Would you tell me how it affects you?
Well, When I was in detention, the feelings I had and my colleagues did have, I looked at, for instance, the history of black people from the days of slavery. I found that they suffered at the hands of white people. Then I looked at the days of colonialism. I also found that the black man was, again, at the bottom of everything, was under oppression from the white man. And I looked at America and Britain. In America, I still found that despite the emancipation, the black man was still at the bottom of everything. He's as it were an object. And then we looked at South Africa and Rhodesia. We found that these were countries with institutionalized racism, where again the black person is at the bottom of everything, undergoes torture, is something less than human, is an object. If you don't tell them what they want, you then go to detention. But the other system of torture is that they can tie you to your legs to a tree, your hands to a car, and pull. They say, if you don't tell us who did what or what you did, we are going to pull you apart. And of course they pull. Some people have died as a result of torture.
What did you feel when you came out of prison?
I didn't, I'd grown in a way to be indifferent. The torture I'd undergone for the last 5 years made me less and less feeling about things, just take life as it comes. So even when I came out, there was no great excitement on my part. And I still felt that I was still in prison.
Since the wagon wheels rode north, it has been many years. The country has been built and run by hardy pioneers. They fought the Matabele and many a hardship too. With flag unfurled, we tell the world and sing this song to you. And you can call us rebels, and you can call us rogues. We were founded by an Englishman by the name of Cecil Rhodes.
Thank you, Timothy, but you didn't open that one, you stupid thing. But don't worry about it. We'll open it ourselves. Drink the line.
Did you always believe that one day you would leave Rhodesia?
Never, ever. Now, I was one of the guys going to stay here and switch off the lights in Anatolia. I was going to switch off the lights and then close the gates and say, right, Rhodesia, farewell. And then burn as we go back. And it didn't happen. I was going to switch off the lights in Anatolia. But things are happening so fast at the moment. It just... I haven't got that much time anymore.
You're going and leaving the lights on?
That's right. Somebody else will have to switch them off.
Why don't you stay and take the gamble, take the risk?
Pete, there is no risk. I mean, there is no gamble. There is a risk, but there's no gamble. The gamble is all on the... The gooks have got it.
The who?
The gooks. It is.
They've
the whole world is supporting the terrorists.
Has the attitude of Africans changed as a result of what is currently happening?
Yes. Yes.
In what way?
I've got a staff, or the company I work with has got a staff of about eight Africans, and they all think they're going to own houses. And I've never seen so many Africans learning to drive motor cars as what I have lately, because every one of them thinks they're going to get a motor car. A little garden, we call him a garden boy, was washing my mother-in-law's car. And he said to her, he says, well, next year, that's going to be my car. So my mother-in-law went to him and says, well, you see this box of matches, it's lighter, I'll burn it before I give it to you. So that's the attitude of the African. It's changed completely. Ratios here at the moment, I think we are about 34-1, maybe a bit more, with everybody taking a gap like me. In South Africa at the moment, I think it's about 4-1, I think, about 4-1. So you could stand a chance.
Does that make you feel happier?
Well, I could take out 4 Affies before they take me out.
But you couldn't 36?
No way, say.
The colonial world is a world cut in two. The dividing line, the frontiers are shown by barracks and police stations. In the colonies, it is the policeman and the soldier who are the official, instituted go-betweens, the spokesman of the settler and his rule of oppression. The intermediary does not lighten the oppression, but puts it into practice with the clear conscience upholder of the peace. Yet he is the bringer of violence into the home and into the mind of the native. The zone where the natives live is not complementary to the zone inhabited by the settlers. The two zones are opposed, but not in the service of a higher unity.
Do what they do. Okay? Should you come under attack, go through, unless you're very well back and you can see the contacts well ahead.
Is the road very dangerous?
Oh, it's a bit dicey at the moment.
The settler's town is a strongly built town, all made of stone and steel. It is a brightly lit town. The streets are covered with asphalt. Garbage cans swallow all the leavings. Unseen, unknown, and hardly thought about. The settler's feet are never visible. His feet are protected by strong shoes, although the streets of his town are clean and even, with no holes or stones. The town belonging to the colonized people, the shanty town, the Negro village, the Medina, the reservation, is a place of ill fame, peopled by men of evil repute. They are born there. It matters little where or how. They die there. It matters not where nor how. It is a world without spaciousness. Men live there on top of each other, and their huts are built one on top of the other. The native town is a hungry town, starved of bread, of meat, of shoes, of coal, of light. The native town is a crouching village, a town on its knees, a town wallowing in the mire. It is a town of niggers and dirty Arabs. The look the native turns on the settler's town is a look of lust, a look of envy. It expresses his dreams of possession, all manner of possession. To sit at the settler's table, to sleep in the settler's bed, with his wife if possible. The colonized man is an envious man. And this the settler knows very well. When their glances meet, he ascertains bitterly, always on the defensive. They want to take our place. It is true, for there is no native who does not dream at least once a day of setting himself up in the settler's place.
What is your general attitude towards the white minority if they remain in the country?
We accept them. Every white man who would like to remain in the country is free to do so, provided he accepts the system that will have been established. The new government, of course, we must accept that his privileges based on color have gone, and that we will not have a different set of privileges from those which are accorded to members of other racial groups. But overally, we will not perpetuate the system where people are organized communally on the basis of race or color. We want an integrated society where not the color of a person counts, but the skills that he's able to show and the contribution he's prepared to make to the development of the country.
July 27, 1966, your employment has thou conceded to exist, and you have to leave the company house you are occupying, and the occasions area has from July the 28, 1966. See that? The company will provide transportation to the boundary of the concession area from you. Never mind, I'll get a copy. You get a copy, that's all right. I'll take this one to the panel department. No, there is no assignment here. They won't tell me to sign here, man. I'm not so... Now, listen, let me tell you something. I was about to go to work, you understand? So now, I have to get some kind of information from Mr. Gooden.
No, it's not more question of information. Now, you sign for this copy, or you leave it.
Torsdagen den 21 juli i år. Egentligen en vanlig arbetsdag, men soldater posterar den här dagen vid alla arbetsplatser. Arbetet ligger nere. Liberianerna i Nimba har gått i strejk. Rimonger, ordförande i fackföreningen vid Lamco, fängslad och anklagad för att ha förlett ett par tusen liberianer att demonstrera för högre löner. En strejk som på förhand förklarats olaglig. Avvaktande sitt öde utanför mässen i Nimba. Här förs fackföreningsledarna till den väntande bilen av Lamco-ledningen och representanter för Liberias regering, vars talesmän redan inför den strejkande menigheten tillkännagett resans mål. Det beryktade fängelset Belgella, ökänt som landets värsta tortyranstalt, varifrån det sällan eller aldrig finns någon återvändo.
Ledningen inom fackföreningen har betett sig på ett som vi tycker helt oansvarigt och illegalt sätt. Det finns en fackföreningslag och en lag som bestämmer spelreglerna mellan arbetsgivare och arbetstagare, och den har helt brutits.
Klockan 7 på måndag morgon var allt fortfarande lugnt. Arbetarna gick till möte i fackföreningslokalen istället för till arbetet. Måndag förmiddag anländer starkt försenad militär förstärkning från Monrovia. En bataljon på över 300 man samlas utanför tjänstemannamässen. Efter uppställning laddas med skarp ammunition.
You want to tell me, if the workers in students strike or something like that, do you think the government is going to use arm on them? No.
Why are the soldiers here?
Well, the soldiers here may be on Lanco's claim or Lanco's desire. But there is no threat, no word of violence ever been used to anybody. And the strike, it was organized from the workers themselves, which were tired and fed up of the Lanco's management and wouldn't pay them the money, so they decided to strike.
Alla känner till hotet om evakuering dagen därpå. Ändå får arbetarbussarna veta tillbaka nästan tomma. Och fackföreningslokalen har omringats av militär för att förhindra några fler möten med de strejkande.
I wrote them a letter and told them that they had were violating the laws of the country, that they could not strike except they first submitted grievances. If they had any grievances, they should submit them first to management in keeping with the law. And if they could not agree, then refer the matter to government. But they persisted and would not go back to work. I then ordered the place to be policed so that to prevent violence.
Well, my orders were to the extent to break the mob or whatever existed by all costs. And of course, if it had become necessary to
resort to force. My orders were to fire over the people's heads originally, and then wound a few people in the attempt to break the crowd. This would have been a necessity.
För Lamco-ledningen innebar dagen en missräkning. Strejken ville inte ta slut, och man stod inför risken att tvingas avskeda större delen av arbetsstyrkan.
Det visade sig att det var endast en 25% som ställde upp. Vi hade trott att en mycket större andel av arbetarna skulle komma till arbete, men det gjorde de alltså inte.
En vecka har gått sedan strejken bröt ut. Klockan 7 på morgonen är det hela klart. Arbetarna har gått tillbaka. Återstår för Lamco att utmäta straffet. 30 uppsägningsbrev ska delas ut. Mottagare är de liberianska arbetare som redan stämplats som troublemakers eller uppviglare. Dessa 30 troublemakers uppsökers på torsdagsmorgonen i sina hem, men ingen av dem är hemma. Även de hade gått tillbaka till sina arbetsplatser.
Of course, my children didn't realize anything. I told them, I said, children, I tell you one thing, this is not your home.
Robert Jackson undrade varför han hade blivit avskedad. Vad visste hans närmaste chef, Sören Lagergren?
Svår fråga, jag vet inte. Men det var en väldigt duktig pojke och har säkert framtiden för sig som telefonman. Orsaken till att han slutat, det vet jag faktiskt ingenting om.
Det var alltså inte så att det var fel på hans arbetsinsats?
Nej, definitivt inte. Han var väldigt duktig. Han är väl den utav mina pojkar som har utvecklats bäst och kunde åka alldeles ensam på arbete ut och reparera.
The truck in, I put my things in with my family and put everything on the truck with my boys and myself. I know one of people wanted to go of us from this place here.
Efter en timmes färd genom bushen på skakiga vägar var man äntligen utanför Lamcos område, 3,5 mil bort från Nimba. Beräkningsbilarna gick den här dagen i skytteltrafik.
Even how the driver was driving, even advising. I said, there's a woman with us here. My brother-in-law's wife is in the car. She was pregnant. I said, take time. Stay the driver wouldn't, hear me. I said, well, if anything happened, okay.
Ute i bushen stannar lastbilen. Robert Jacksons 5-åriga tjänst för Lamco är definitivt slut. Det återstår endast en detalj, kvittot på resan hit. Härmed intygas att militären transporterat mina tillhörigheter och min familj utan att skador eller olyckor uppstått, Robert Jackson. Soldaterna hade gjort sitt. I mörkret fick Robert Jackson och hans familj klara sig på egen hand.
When you examine at close quarters the colonial context, it is evident that what defines one's place in the world is the fact of belonging to or not belonging to a given race, a given species. In the colonies, the economic substructure is also a superstructure. The cause is the consequence. You are rich because you are white. You are white because you are rich. Native society is not simply described as a society lacking in values. The native is declared insensible to ethics. He represents not only the absence of values, but also the negation of values. All values, in fact, are irrevocably poisoned and diseased as soon as they are allowed in contact with the colonized race. The customs of the colonized people, their traditions, their myths, above all, their myths, are the very sign of that poverty of spirit. As soon as the native begins to cause anxiety to the settler, he is handed over to well-meaning souls who point out to him the wealth of Western values. I speak of the Christian religion, and no one need be astonished. The church in the colonies is the white people's church, the foreigner's church. She does not call the native to God's ways, but to the ways of the white man, of the master, of the oppressor. And as we know, in this matter, many are called, but few chosen.
Hur länge har ni varit här?
Här i Tanzania?
Ja.
Sen 52 i december månad.
Vad som skulle vara intressant att höra är vad har förändrats här framför allt i första hand?
Ja, det största förändringarna och det är väl att det blev en fri stat.
Ja.
Det är väl faktiskt en av de största.
Har människorna förändrats på något sätt? Invändigt så att säga?
Ja, de är väl rätt så lika tror jag.
Har ni själv förändrats?
Ja, det har man säkert efter så många år.
I vilken riktning?
Ja. Man ser väl kanske lite annorlunda på läget också nu än strax när man kom ut ska jag tänka mig. Så man kanske ser lite mer realistiskt på det också.
Mm. Har ni försökt att ändra på människor? Det har väl varit en del av er uppgift?
Ja, det är klart. Det har vi väl försökt för att vi är ju ute i missionens tjänst och på så sätt har vi försökt att förändra.
I första hand då i religiösa frågor naturligtvis. Ja, vad fanns det för religion här innan ni kom hit? Är det någon som ni inte tycker att det kan godkänna så att säga?
Det fanns.
Den afrikanska religionen menar jag.
Den afrikanska religionen, det har väl, ska man säga, den har väl alltid funnits och den fortsätter väl finnas, det är klart. Men missionen i stort sett, den har ju fått ett väldigt bra grepp över folksjälen tror jag.
Ja. Men det måste ju ha inneburit stora förändringar på många håll, till exempel vad ska jag säga, familjeorganisationer med polygami och sånt.
Ja, kanske.
Ja.
Ja, vi som mission, vi förbjuder ju att församlingsmedlemmar ska ha mer än en hustru till exempel. Det är ju otänkbart för en som tillhör en pingstförsamling här ute att kunna gifta sig en andra eller tredje gång. Utan då får han nöja sig med sin första fru.
Är det egentligen en kristen synpunkt eller är det en europeisk synpunkt? Finns det något stöd i Bibeln för monogami?
Det gör det väl?
Gör det?
Åtminstone i det nya testamentet så.
Finns det någonstans där att man bara får ha en hustru?
Till exempel, det står att en församlingsföreståndare ska vara en mans hustru. En hustrus man.
Alltså. Ja. Och nu bygger ni en kyrka här i Morsi.
Ja, det har vi.
Jag ser. Är det det som kommer först så att säga, kyrkan, evangeliseringen?
Ja, det brukar vi försöka att göra.
Kommer ni att också bygga skolor och sjukhus och sånt här? Eller?
Det vet vi inte just nu.
Nej,
det får bli i andra hand i så fall.
Ja.
Men först en kyrka.
Ja.
För att det känner vi väldigt stort behov av att få.
In the colonial context, the settler ends his work of breaking in the native when the latter admits loudly and intelligibly the supremacy of white man's values. For a colonized people, the most essential value, because the most concrete, is first and foremost the land which will bring them bread and, above all, dignity. But this dignity has nothing to do with the dignity of the human individual. For that human individual has never heard tell of it. All that the native has seen in his country is that they can freely arrest him, beat him, starve him, and no professor of ethics, no priest, has ever come to be beaten in his place, nor to share his bread with him. The well-known principle that all men are equal will be illustrated in the colonies from the moment that the native claims that he is the equal of the settler. The native intellectual had learned from his masters that the individual ought to express himself fully. The colonialist bourgeoisie had hammered into the native's mind the essential qualities of the West, the idea of a society of individuals, where each person shuts himself up in his own subjectivity, a society whose only asset is individual thought. The colonized man will first manifest this aggressiveness, which has been deposited in his bones, against his own people. This is the period when the niggers beat each other up, and the police and magistrates do not know which way to turn when faced with the astonishing waves of crime. All these patterns of conduct are those of the death reflex when faced with danger. A suicidal behavior which proves to the settler that these men are not reasonable human beings. The oppressor starts the process of domination, of exploitation, and of robbery. In the other sphere, the coiled, plundered creature, which is the native, provides fuel for the process as best he can. The process moves uninterruptedly from the banks of the colonial territory to the palaces and the docks of the mother country. In this becalmed zone, the sea has a smooth surface. The palm tree stirs gently in the breeze. The waves lap against the pebbles, and raw materials are ceaselessly transported, justifying the presence of the settler.
There's no way or place for me to go. This is my home. And this is where I intend to die.
The settler makes history. His life is an epic, an odyssey. He is the absolute beginning. This land was created by us. He is the unceasing cause. If we leave, all is lost, and the country will go back to the Middle Ages. And all the while, the native, bent double, more dead than alive, exists interminably in an unchanging dream. The native is boxed into a corner. Apartheid is simply one form of the division into compartments of the colonial world. The first thing which the native learns is to stay in his place and to not go beyond certain limits. This is why the dreams of the native are always of muscular prowess. His dreams are of action and of aggression. I dream I am jumping, swimming, running, climbing. I dream that I burst out laughing, that I span a river in one stride, or that I'm followed by a flood of motor cars which never catch up with me. During the period of colonization, the native never stops achieving his freedom, from 9 in the evening until 6 in the morning.
Atutimba mono kavili, tondele pondisa, tondele melia, na tondinga mukanga. Na tondigwana, mpaka muso atujele sinu panyuma, kwa damwa mapinduzi ankuka muso, na tuwedu tuwaikidile, atunujili panyuma. Uti tuwe ngwengwe tuwe meo, na tujila panyuma na tunkuka muzo kuigwana koko mpaka nelo na tukandalambolela pamuikile mabadi wetu mwida kunu mutulola tundaimba limu padikidiki tunduvanga mwaka 70 wedili kwetu kunu kumazambiki General Kauza de Arriaga Daliaga anituma zenera Daliaga wena kumosambiki Upatende ingondo udimenchachola wana igwe sakataka
that 9 hostages were killed by police bullets. The Daily Graphic has criticized the Mogadishu Declaration after the recent summit meeting of East and Central African leaders. Taxpayers in Black Africa can expect to see more money being poured into the pockets of pleasure-loving terrorists living outside the borders of South Africa.
Mozambican people, in September of 1962, the Congress of the Mozambique Liberation Front, Frelimo, affirmed unanimously the will and determination of the Mozambican people to fight for national independence, for the wealth of our country and the work of the Mozambican people continue to be exploited by the Portuguese colonialists and their imperialist allies. Our people are murdered for participating in the struggle for the liberation of our country. The prisons are full of patriots, and those who are still free live in uncertainty of what the next day will bring. Faced with this situation, Frelimo is left with no alternative but to conclude that armed struggle is the only way for the Mozambican people to achieve their sacred rights. We shall win! Long live Frelimo! Long live Mozambique! Long live Africa!
Watu ndinji mwitu mwakone vitendo mwenkaloni yotutawepa nyumu umyaka dumiya mwani. Pena tindona kanga isa mbone wetu tumiki nkaloni tuninyogo wila uri kanyina yala tisini. Ni alo tuwetu mtutu kwelo dio kaloni na kunyama nae bari ndapaga mwitu. Nangu ni mwani pupunguwa ndikawa kenga nangu ni mwani ntezi Mozambique. Mwase tuone sakubilingananga zake. Mwamba pamala mutu nkuona wetu tuwenye. Kanji pata ante patu kola mpanyuma pala Mozambique hata yumo ziwa na lidile kota kenga. Kutangola kenga kutangona wani kenga duoni. Akusipagu. Nepa tuwe hapu Mozambique nkusema nkutana wesema Mozambique kumwagu kukenda tango nkutana.
Nós vemos que o inimigo ultimamente intensificou a ação psicológica contra as nossas populações. Esta ação psicológica inimiga consiste basicamente no uso maciço ou massivo dos aviões de bombardeamento que lhe foram oferecidos pelos países da NATO, designadamente os aviões de reação a jato Fiat G91, que quase que constantemente esses aviões andam a aterrorizar as nossas populações e a lançarem muitas bombas napalm que têm causado muitos ferimentos às populações.
I det här kriget där Frelimos gerillaarmé inte disponerar något flyg och där portugiserna kontrollerar luftrummet, där kan kolonialarmén alltid tillfälligt ockupera mindre områden inom de befriade zonerna. Portugiserna kan koncentrera sitt artilleri och sina trupper till vilken punkt de vill. Men under de senaste 3 åren har de portugisiska soldaterna kunnat ta sig in i de befriade områdena uteslutande med helikopter. När de väl har lämnat sina helikoptrar och måste operera till fots ute i djungeln och snåren är de utlämnade åt gerillaarmén. Och de kan nästan aldrig hålla sig kvar mer än ett par veckor innan de dödas eller drivs bort. Portugiserna säger de försöker förstöra så mycket som möjligt av skördar och odlingar för att svälta ut gerilla. De terroriserar den lokala befolkningen vid anfallen mot de befriade områdena för att människorna där ska få känslan av att Frelimo inte kan skydda dem. De förstör så mycket som möjligt av det som befolkningen i de befriade områdena har byggt upp. Det betyder att varje skola, varje sjukhus, varje barnhem i de befriade områdena är ett militärt mål för den portugisiska kolonialmakten.
Kenga patani ditangolo usdon. Wetu kala tisindawa na mauvili makumenanene. Na tisipata nafasi ya kulota kunda lipundishi disikola. Ni tuvanu tusikala vila. Na kusidi na meni nkaloni kutunyenyekede na meni me kutulangude nyamanyi. na wetu atusimanya kenga tundoka wanda pagu kwali vanu wamanyite kusomya kwali kupagu vanu wamanyite nyama sipita kenga pakati petu na kana wakati wo wetu tusindobona mene kwali vajuju wetu vatata wetu kuwe mekupata inapasi ya kulota kututumidide wetu kusikola kanji vanavo vasinda pati na meni tabu kuwakamula kumkuka na kumpanga na wakale madengo vanavo na wakakola madengo lala avasipata njuluku kwali wakulota kwida na tutumike twana wawo kutubya koda nyamani mambo mwenkalone lala tunyenyekede me kutula ngude nyamani sio tulota kukanda pata wetu musu
panelo tukava kenga kwa tundu wangu filimai tundiona sini cha kupuwangira na uti sindimo matanga yani kupuwangira madengo ni akoleka na madengo akumbukidikanga nkongo Mozambique tuntendi doni mpaka tundiu kanda walinya limo kenga hapa wangupaga makomandante walume na doni ngupaga makomandante wakongo angupaga sefu dede walume na doni ngupaga sefu dede destacamento feminino yani tungupaga uti pakupasala nanga
Chamo Messimão Elias. Eu estou na Frelimo, como membro da Frelimo, é para ajudar o povo moçambicano. Visto que eu também pertenço a Moçambique, sou filho dentro de Moçambique, nasci em Moçambique e isto vi melhor servir o meu povo. Estou na Frelimo a servir o meu povo. E na medicina é tal e qual, estou ali na medicina praticando, quer dizer, ter ideias da direção do serviço de saúde para ajudar o povo moçambicano. Somente.
Quando será livre Moçambique?
Moçambique não se sabe a quando será livre. Mas é uma coisa que não se sabe a quando será livre. Sim.
Vai durar muito tempo?
É capaz de durar ou não, mas é porque custa dizer, é porque não se sabe. Não se sabe.
The immobility to which the native is condemned can only be called into question if the native decides to put an end to the history of colonization, the history of robbery, and to bring into existence the history of the nation, the history of decolonization. It is clear that in the colonial countries, the peasants alone are revolutionary, for they have nothing to lose and everything to gain. The starving peasant, outside the class system, is the first among the exploited to discover that only violence pays. For him, there is no compromise, no possible coming to terms. Colonization or decolonization is simply a question of relative strength. The exploited man sees that his liberation implies the use of all means, and that of force, first and foremost.
Tu ka bem ka zado, 4 sato, que bemba bota bumba balmale. Eu já manga de gente na casa, mas outro balma era banta outro cara banta, mas mal são minher. É quebra na casa tudo, na nota banca suma no céu.
cek mentak kena mbak di sini kehen
Sandal. Tanto hai.
buan mesti buka tidak buan pohon di tengah ada di sila acumba
Arma em posição de tiro.
Morder à frente.
Afirmativo. Ora, informa-se já está a pedir escuta.
Que beijas o tempo, diz à minha mãe que eu não vou para a guerra. Diz à minha mãe que eu não vou para a guerra. Diz ao mar à minha mãe que matar não me apraz. No fundo quem vai à guerra é aquele que a não faz. Vou cantar a liberdade para a minha pátria amada e para a mãe negra e triste que vive acorrentada. Mas a voz do nosso povo no dia do julgamento te dirá a ti ao mar e dirá de vento a vento quem são os traidores, se é quem nos rouba o pão ou se nós os desertores, que à guerra dizemos não.
Que foi um bocado diferente. E depois às tantas, quando a gente vai voltar para começar a movimentar, fomos também parados de coisa.
La situation politique
en Guinée est semblable à celle des autres territoires portugais. Les populations, dans leur grande majorité, sont dans la firme décision de maintenir intégré dans l'ordre politique de la nation portugaise.
The colonized man finds his freedom in and through violence. Violence enlightens because it indicates to the means and the end. At the level of individuals, violence is a cleansing force. It frees the colonized man from his inferiority complex. It makes him fearless and restores his self-respect. The mass of the people struggle against the same poverty, flounder about making the same gestures, and with their shrunken bellies, outline what has been called the geography of hunger. It is an underdeveloped world, a world inhuman in its poverty, but also it is a world without doctors, without engineers, and without administrators. If you wish for independence, take it and starve, and go back to the Middle Ages. Decolonization never takes place unnoticed, for it influences individuals and modifies them fundamentally. It brings a natural rhythm into existence, introduced by new men, and with it, a new language and a new humanity.
Está bom. Está bom? Como de operação?
Está bom.
Está bom? Ferida nada? Gosi, ferida nada? Qual vai ser a operação?
Quer muito.
Quer muito? Aham.
Bocadinho.
Bocadinho.
Até pouco, hein?
Não tem problema.
Bom.
Salazar disait que l'Afrique n'existe pas sans les Européens. Nous considérons que notre indépendance nous permettra de développer notre propre culture, nous développer nous-mêmes et de développer nos pays en délivrant nos peuples de la misère, de la souffrance, de l'ignorance. Parce que vous savez quel est l'état où nous nous trouvons. Après 5 siècles de présence portugaise chez nous, nous sommes prêts à n'importe quel moment à négocier. C'est au portugais de dire quelque chose. Et comme nous parlons la même langue, c'est pas difficile de s'entendre.
Capitalism, in its early days, saw in the colonies a source of raw materials, which once turned into manufactured goods, could be distributed on the European market. After a phase of accumulation of capital, capitalism has today come to modify its conception of the profit-earning capacity of a commercial enterprise. A blind domination founded on slavery is not, economically speaking, worthwhile. The colonies have become a market. Today, the colonized country's national struggle crops up in a completely new international situation. What the factory owners and finance magnates of the mother country expect from their government is not that it should decimate the colonial peoples, but that it should safeguard their own legitimate interests. the private companies put pressure on their own governments, at least to set up military bases for the purpose of assuring protection of their interests. Thus, there exists a sort of detached complicity between capitalism and the violent forces which blaze up in a colonial territory. For centuries, the capitalists have behaved in the underdeveloped world like nothing more than war criminals. Deportations, massacres, forced labor, and slavery have been the main methods used by capitalism to increase its wealth, its gold or diamond reserves, and to establish its power. Not long ago, Nazism transformed the whole of Europe into a veritable colony. The governments of European nations called for reparations and demanded wealth which had been stolen from them. Cultural treasures, pictures, sculptures, and stained glass have been given back to their owners. The wealth of the imperial countries is our wealth too. Europe has stuffed herself excessively with the gold and raw materials of the colonial countries, Latin America, China, and Africa. From all these continents, under whose eyes Europe today raises up her tower of wealth, there has flowed out for centuries towards that same Europe diamonds and oil, silk and cotton, wood and exotic products. Europe is literally the creation of the third world. The wealth which smothers her is that which was stolen from the underdeveloped peoples. The well-being and the progress of Europe have been built up with the sweat and the dead bodies of Negroes, Arabs, Indians, and the Asian races. We have decided not to overlook this any longer. They will not manage to divide the progressive forces which mean to lead mankind toward happiness by brandishing the threat of a third world which is rising like the tide to swallow up all Europe. The third world does not mean to organize a great crusade of hunger against the whole of Europe. What it expects from those who for centuries have kept it in slavery is that they will help it to rehabilitate mankind and make humanity victorious everywhere, once and for all.
Qu'est-ce que la démocratie pour vous?
Je crois au peuple. Le peuple, je crois comme une force, comme une puissance. Celui qui sait parler au peuple, celui qui sait avoir la confiance du peuple, peut tout réussir. Mais celui...
parler?
Non, parler au cœur du peuple. Faire sentir ses idées au peuple. Le financement extérieur ne doit pas apparaître comme une solution miracle à tous nos problèmes économiques. Oui, il faut les financements extérieurs, mais il faut d'abord commencer par travailler soi-même. Et si on ne travaille pas, des solutions comme celle du FMI apparaissent comme des solutions de facilité. Et dès qu'on a une petite difficulté, on court au FMI. Dès qu'on a une petite difficulté, on court au FMI. Ceci est une mauvaise chose. Deuxième élément très important aussi, c'est que nous avons l'impression que chaque fois qu'on nous pose les conditions, au niveau du FMI par exemple, c'est pour créer d'autres conditions. On nous dit, nous sommes prêts à vous accorder tel financement à condition que vous fassiez telle chose. Nous acceptons ces conditions, nous remplissons ces conditions. On nous amène encore d'autres conditions. On nous amène encore d'autres conditions. Cela devient troublant. Alors, quels sont les pays où le FMI a réussi? Quels sont les exemples où le FMI est parti et cela marche très bien? Nous n'en voyons pas.
Vous avez dit non à l'aide alimentaire. Pourquoi?
L'aide alimentaire que nous avons reçue malheureusement, au lieu de nous aider à nous développer, nous a maintenus dans une mentalité d'assister. Chaque jour, on tend la main pour demander à manger. Ça, c'est mauvais. Deuxièmement, l'aide alimentaire fait que les paysans de chez nous qui auraient pu produire ne peuvent plus produire parce que quand ils produisent, ils n'arrivent plus à vendre. C'est les surplus des paysans des autres pays qu'on nous amène ici. Nous, nous demandons autre chose. Celui qui veut nous aider vraiment peut nous donner des charrues ou des tracteurs, des engrais, des insecticides, des tuyaux, des arrosoirs, des barrages, des forages. Voilà, ça c'est de l'aide alimentaire. Mais celui qui nous amène les sacs de blé, de mil, de maïs ou du lait, celui-là ne nous aide pas. Il nous gave comme on gave les oies pour pouvoir vendre l'oie, pour qu'elle soit lourde, pesante et qu'on puisse la vendre. Ça, c'est pas nous qui cherchent, c'est leur argent qu'ils cherchent. Ce n'est pas l'aide, ça.
The ports of Holland, the docks of Bordeaux and Liverpool were specialized in the Negro slave trade and owe their renown to millions of deported slaves. So when we hear the head of a European state declare with his hand on his heart that he must come to the aid of the poor, underdeveloped peoples, we do not tremble with gratitude. Quite the contrary. We say to ourselves, it's a just reparation which will be paid to us. This help should be the ratification of a double realization. The realization by the colonized peoples that it is their due, and the realization by the capitalist powers that in fact they must pay. But it is clear that we are not so naive as to think that this will come about with the cooperation and the goodwill of the European governments. This huge task, which consists of reintroducing mankind into the world, the whole of mankind, will be carried out with the indispensable help of the European peoples, who themselves must realize that in the past, they have often joined the ranks of our common masters. To achieve this, the European peoples must first decide to wake up and shake themselves, use their brains, and stop playing the stupid game of the sleeping beauty. Come, comrades. The European game is finally over. We must look for something else. We can do anything today, provided we do not ape Europe, provided we are not obsessed with catching up with Europe. Europe has gained such a mad and reckless momentum that it has lost control and reason, and is heading at a dizzying speed towards the brink from which we would be advised to remove ourselves as quickly as possible. Europe undertook the leadership of the world with ardor, cynicism, and violence. Look at how the shadow of its palaces stretches and multiplies. We must shake off the heavy darkness in which we were cast and leave it behind. Yet it is very true that we need a model, and that we want blueprints and examples. For many among us, the European model was the most inspiring. But when we search for humanity in the technique and style of Europe, we see only a succession of negations of humanity and an avalanche of murders. The human condition, plans for mankind, and collaboration between people in those tasks which increase the sum total of humanity are new problems which demand true inventions. Let us decide not to imitate Europe. Let us combine our muscles and our brains in a new direction. Let us try to create the whole human being, whom Europe has been incapable of bringing to triumphant birth. Two centuries ago, a former European colony decided to catch up with Europe. It succeeded so well that the United States of America became a monster, in which the taints, the sickness, and the inhumanity of Europe have grown to appalling dimensions. The West saw itself as a spiritual adventure. It is the name of the Spirit, in the name of the Spirit of Europe, that the West has made her encroachments, that she has justified her crimes and legitimized the slavery in which she holds 4/5 of humanity. Yes, the European spirit has strange roots. So, comrades, let us not pay tribute to Europe by creating states, institutions, and societies which draw their inspiration from her. Humanity is waiting for something other from us. If we want to turn Africa into a new Europe, then let us leave the destiny of our countries to Europeans. They will know how to do it better than the most gifted among us. But if we want humanity to advance a step further, if we want to bring it up to a different level than that which Europe has shown, then we must invent and we must make discoveries. For Europe, for ourselves, and for humanity. Comrades, we must turn over a new leaf. We must work out new concepts and try to set afoot a new human being.
Serei tambor no coração do embondeiro para transportar até vós num batuque doido, arrepiante e alegre. A nítida sensação das coisas libertas e do ressoar dos passos ainda hesitantes, confusos por bailar lado a lado com a liberdade, confusos por bailar